Conversations here, but I'm a last-minute fill-in for some other talk that wasn't able to make it. So, my name is Mike Gifford, and I am a open standards and practices lead at CivicActions, which is an American company. But we also do work on, we do a lot of work with Drupal. I'm a Drupal core accessibility maintainer, which is why I'm wearing an accessibility shirt. And also in the WC3 as an invited expert, I do work on sustainability and accessibility there. And I'm here because here in Europe, not because CivicActions is trying to go off and look at building a, expanding our business into Europe, but because there's an opportunity to go off and look at building a global network of companies that work with governments and engage with each other and trying to build towards that digital commons, that the values and working collectively and sharing each other's code across borders, across barriers, because you can set up a tariff in an individual country, but there's no tariff on free software. So how do we try and encourage more collaboration so that people can continue to innovate and continue to develop? But the topic that I'm discussing today is digital public goods and incentivizing collaboration, because that's part of the problem that we see right now, is that people are not seeing enough reasons to go off and to collaborate and to share. And so I have a number of slides here that will involve either icebergs or puffins. So they don't have any relevance to the topic except dealing with things like sustainable development goals and climate issues. But yeah, don't if you're not sure what it is, it's either a puffin or an iceberg. And this is from a trip I went to Newfoundland in May. So these are all my photos. So first of all, how many people here know what digital public goods are? Like certified digital public goods? Okay, so this is a fairly new initiative, and the UN was involved in trying to organize this and to coordinate around what are some like to broaden the definition and to make it focus not just on liberty and the ability to share, and not just on licensing, but to try and say how do we focus on public goods and the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's open source software that is, it's also open standards, it's open data, it's open AI systems, it's open content collaborations. It's software that has an intent for doing good for the public, and they wanted to, as part of this, try and expand it as well to say how do we try and look at what are the things that are not necessarily included in it when you just throw a license on it? Like privacy is not something that is included by default when you're building out software. You have no idea if the software itself respects the GDPR or whether or not it has any security policies that are best practices. And as a group that's trying to look at defining public goods and encouraging governments to adopt common pieces of software, having the commitments around a third-party evaluation for security and privacy is a way to go off and differentiate those pieces of software that have a community behind them that can support that, and those which do not. It's also they've also tried to align it with specific elements of the Sustainable Development Goals. Is everyone here familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals? We've got them all here in case you're curious. These are basically the lowest level of what governments should be thinking about and cooperating about in order to go off and support citizens. There's nothing in here that's controversial, unless you live in some countries where they've decided to make these things controversial. But these are, and I'm a Canadian and I live in Canada, so I'm not in one of those places. But there are some countries where talking about the Sustainable Development Goals is a challenge. And it shouldn't be, because there's nothing in here that's controversial, or shouldn't be. And in terms of equality, in terms of meeting the needs of citizens, in terms of protecting the environment, these are all basic table stakes for being a functioning, viable, democratic government. So again, these are good goals to aim for, and something that any project that should be able to find some way that they can align with or organize around these goals. But the foundation of the digital public goods is that free open source software. And having that sense of the industry creation of it, and since the internet has been founded, it's just become so much easier to innovate through open source and to share code and share content and to build on each other's work. And it has become something where I think we can in many ways say that open source has won. If you look at the Black Duck study of the use of open source software within commercial software, or just within software in general, there's so much open source software out there that is used in proprietary products that it's not like the battle that we were having 20 or 30 years ago when it was like, let's define open source software. No, open source software is there, it's being used, but it's being used often in an exploitative fashion, in a way that doesn't build and support that community of software. But it is, we need to try and support an easier way for people to contribute to, and also to help build and maintain those projects, because every piece of software out there needs to get that support. Like the innovation side is where people have focused their energies. They focused on how do we try and encourage innovation. There's no government out there that's like, hey, how do we go off and support encouraging maintenance? Like maintenance it's not flashy. It doesn't encourage there's no press releases involved in maintaining information, but it's so critical to technology and to basic infrastructure. And so there needs to be an effort to try and encourage more makers and to discourage the takers. And I think that there are ways to do that. It was lovely to hear the talk earlier by Sachiko and Johannes about procurement, and saying again that this is one mechanism to try and encourage people to change the incentives and to get people involved in supporting the use of open source. And there's a great opportunity that all the governments around the world that are revising their procurement standards right now can look towards and say, how can we think about in this window, how do we try and encourage the better practices that will help our countries innovate and collaborate together more effectively. So I want to get back to the digital public goods and examples of DPGs that you might have heard about. This is LinuxConf, so Fedora and Rocky Linux are both operating systems that are certified digital public goods. Drupal is also one. How many people here have heard of Drupal? Figured as much. Is anyone currently using Drupal? It's not just me. No? No one uses Drupal? Okay, one person uses Drupal. Okay. There's also open data repositories. Both CCAN and DCAN are open data repositories that are digital public goods. DCAN is a Drupal-based one that CivicActions maintains. CCAN is another good data repository that's quite popular. Ushaidi, OpenStreetMap are more sort of crowdsourced information and mapping implementations. Xroad, Decidium, Obi, and AccessMod are examples of accessibility technology that are recognized as digital public goods. So that they're from a broad sort of section of the tech world. So there's a lot of different ones out there that people can look for and say, what are the applications we can try and build and organize around? Oops. And I clicked on the wrong thing. Sorry. So in order to go off and to differentiate between generally like things that are digital, that you can define as a digital public good, and things that are certified as digital public goods. The Digital Public Goods Alliance is the organization that's going through the process of certifying and evaluating the applications out there. There's lots of products out there that probably meet the requirements of being a digital public good, but haven't gone through the process of applying and certifying and making sure that they're following the best practices and following the example that is being set from the Digital Public Goods Alliance. And I think that that's probably fine. That most open source projects are not going to necessarily even be aware of the DPG. But I think it's useful that if we have more FOSS projects thinking about how their work applies to a bigger kind of impact, and if we have them thinking about how can this be used in all kinds of ways that are outside of the technology and the bubble that they're in. Like, it was fascinating to go off and to have the curl conversation this morning in the keynote, and having examples of how curl's being used on Mars and being used on in all of the automobiles that we drive, in so many other applications that you don't even think about, because if it accesses the internet, the fastest way to go off and pull down information is using curl. So again, it's a fascinating example of it, but that's enabling so much innovation and so much access to information across the board. I don't know what SDGs you would necessarily align this with, but I think it's an interesting process when you're trying to think about impact and incentivizing both the workforce and your own story, to try and say, is there an SDG that you can align it with? Is there a way that you can position the work that you're doing so that it's around education? Is it around infrastructure? Is it around democracy? What are those goals of the digital public goods that are valuable to build on? And if we have more organizations that are trying to increase their standards, if we have these definitions of quality built in within the certified digital public goods, I do think it's going to go off and provide an additional incentive for other free software projects to be adopting the best practices of privacy, of documentation within them. Like, if we have examples out here to say we can do more than just releasing this so that it's free to use, modify, and distribute, we can find ways to also see that it's easier to encourage others to use this and pick up on it. Like, good documentation is a really great resource if you want other people to use it, but so many projects have crappy documentation. So trying to ensure that you're following, encouraging the best practices more or less. I think that there's lots of reasons to go off and encourage the use of the effort, encouraging organizations to step up and go beyond just adopting free software. But some of them include. I guess the most critical piece of this is that nobody's inspired by software licenses. I've never found anyone outside of the tech bubble who cares whether about something is GPL or BSD or Apache or APGL. Like, it's not a conversation that even in the tech community that people can care about, because there are some people who care about it passionately, but it's a very, very small community even within this organization. I don't know that you'd necessarily be able to find 50 people here at this conference who could really have a heated conversation about all of those topics and enjoy it. Whereas the idea of, like, how do we achieve good? How do we try and do better as a community in order to go off and to support goals that will benefit all of us on this planet? How do we help people and planet by using our skills and sharing and collaborating effectively and strategically in order to have a bigger impact on this planet? That's what I'd like us to move beyond just that basic debate around the types of licenses that we might be using. The other side is that public good is an easier thing to motivate people about. You can talk about public good with accountants and with lawyers, and people understand why you would care about that. Where again, licensing, people, free as in beer, free as in speech, free as in puppies. Like, those are nice conversations for a small niche of people, but it's hard to go off and get people to get excited about that. And we need to have a bigger movement. We need to have people involved and to encourage people who make decisions who are not technological to approve the spending and the investment in this sector. And I think that again, if you're focusing on things that your clients can understand, if you can have them understand why you as a vendor are doing something more than just releasing code for free, but you actually have a public good that's in mind as part of what you're doing. And it might be an easier way to actually get endorsement from them, and also perhaps get them more involved in the project as well, because it's something that they can see that has they can more clearly see the benefits of it, because it's expressed in a way that is less technical or less legalistic. Organizations are able to go off and to see more clearly how the work that they're doing, the contributions they're doing, are helping a bigger effort to improve the world and meet the needs of the world. So for individual contributors, there's a number of different reasons why people might want to contribute. Reputation is a big one. We definitely understand that. And developers are driven to solve interesting problems. We're also in a situation where the more we get involved in communities, the more we share with each other in communities, the better developers we become, or the better contributors we become, because we learn from other people by trying out what we think is best and then testing that with others. If we can learn in a community, it'll be something that is so much more effective, even than trying to learn compared to learn with an AI. Like a lot of us now I think are learning things through engagement with chatbots, and that's great. But your chatbot is never going to go off and disagree with you passionately about something. The chatbots are programmed to go off and to agree about most things. Not necessarily whether or not unicorns are real. I've had that debate with ChatGPT, and yet ChatGPT was firmly engaging with me about narwhals and other sorts of horned and rhinoceros, and I was having an interesting debate with them about unicorns, but still they would come back and say that unicorns are not real. So there's a line there that they will disagree with you on, but it went pretty far, I got to say. People are interested in contributing. People want to feel like they're doing good. So, but it is a lot more than what we tend to get to in terms of this community of scratching your itch. That's certainly one reason that developers do things, but it's not the only reason that people get involved. So, trying to think about what are the other ways, the other pieces of this that might motivate people to become involved in collaborating on open source projects and finding ways to get other people involved by including documentation, ensuring that there's privacy, having things like contribution guidelines around how do you try and ensure that everyone is invited and welcome to participate in this community. There's a lot that can be done even beyond the SDGs to try and even beyond the current definition of digital public goods to try and encourage and hard code those best practices of the community. In terms of business incentives with the DPGs, talent is an ongoing challenge with companies, and making sure that you're able to find people who have aligned values is quite useful. Trying to go off and to identify with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I think, is also something that can motivate people, particularly when you're talking with people who are tied to government, who should all be familiar with the UN's SDGs. They're not, but it's something that is at least it's a point of conversation that should help encourage or raise the level of dialogue. Providing a competitive advantage is also useful, especially within a shared ecosystem. Understanding that you don't need to be the best in the world in many cases. You just need to be the best amongst the competition that's out there. And if you're able to collaborate with others, you can be amongst the best in the world, if not the best in the world, but at least that's being verified by others externally. And I think that DPGs also allow you to try and build other opportunities with related work. So whether that's hosting or support or training, there's a lot of ways that by collaborating through open source software and aligning with these best practices, we can have more opportunities to build better products and work on more ambitious projects, because we're able to externalize some of the other tasks that need to be involved in maintaining technology. So I think government is a really important catalyst for growth. Looking at things like we have like in any country around the world, governments are able to are generally the largest purchaser of goods and services in that country. So there's very few other organizations who shape an economy as much as their government, especially when you consider the legislation elements. If you can have government purchasing set up and be tied to the digital public goods, it's something that I think can provide a real advantage for a government's economy to try and say, okay, this is how and why we're choosing different pieces of software. I think that there's roles to go off and embed DPG principles within contracts to make sure that there's a requirement for code and data and documentation to be shared where it's applicable, where it's beneficial, to find ways to favor the ideas of transparency and interoperability. And to align as much as possible with global goals. So trying to have that built into it. There's also some definitely looking across the sea. There's some interesting initiatives that are out there that I think we can all learn from. There may be people who are looking at what's happening in the States right now and shaking their heads and wondering, where things are going, but there's actually there is some really interesting work being done right now. One of them was with the U.S. Share IT Act, which is an effort to try and make sure that all government code used in by the federal government is available, at least available in a repo that is available either internally or externally and pointed to, so that people can see where it is. Ideally, it's a public repository. Ideally, there's wording there where they want to make that something that's available externally. But right now, every government agency in the U.S. should be sharing their code in a repository of one form or another. How and how that gets done is a whole other issue. But it's an interesting example of a initiative that was passed by Congress that the federal bureaucracy is trying to go off and to implement within the United States. And the Interoperability Act, which was mentioned before, was another great option where people are like, how do we encourage that? How do we build on that? How do we make sure that that's the default for our projects and not an exception? Anyways, there's also a listing of policy documents that was shared by the Digital Public Goods Alliance. There's an effort to document and organize national policies around use of open source software, so that there's an opportunity to learn from each other and to be able to again, like, let's make sure that everyone knows about these practices, because often procurement officers and others in government are not aware of them. It's hard to find out what those best practices are, what those regulations are, because they're looking at historical information that doesn't necessarily reflect their workflow and the context that a procurement officer or a project manager in government is going to see. So I would love to see the scope of the digital public goods also get expanded and see more work in this. Like any standards body, it's not going to be a simple and easy process, but there really should be an effort to see that organizations or projects that have signed on to the digital public goods are as inclusive as possible. Certainly from an accessibility perspective, there's legislation around that in Europe. As of June of this year, I think that all software sold to the European Union is supposed to meet the EN 301549 standards, which is great. We'll see how that is in practice and how that's enforced in different countries and how that rolls out. But it would be nice if there was an equal commitment on the side of software developers to go off and say, yes, we're going to go off and meet those requirements, and we will continue to go off and aspire to meet those requirements going ahead. again, there's efforts to try and say, how do we look at the environmental impact? We are in a climate crisis. I keep wanting to remind people of that because that's something that we tend to forget in tech bubbles, especially with the growth and the excitement of AI. That's something that we need to be regularly reminded of, the fact that we should be acting on this and finding ways to include action on climate change as a regular part of our work. And all of our projects should be finding ways to include a sustainability as part of that. Obviously, there's more work that can be done on monitoring. There's the software bill of rights and materials, like the SBOMs. Like those are an interesting way to go off and to say, look, how do we make sure that all of the technology that's involved in these projects is following best practices on security and licensing, and that we're not sort of somehow missing something, that we can avoid the challenge with the guy in Nebraska, because we understand and are monitoring that whole supply chain. I'd love us to be able to look at building certifications that push us to build more ambitious, trusted systems that are going beyond the GDPR, that are able to help have those be part of the core of how things are being implemented. Also, I'd love to see us be focused on collaboration and expanding. There's some really interesting efforts being done internationally around the digital public infrastructure, as well as on GovStack as another effort to sort of compartmentalize and organize technology to allow for greater reuse of technology. So again, there's interesting options there as well. So there's lots of again, in terms of looking at developing DPGs, individual contributors have an opportunity to drive and innovate and solve challenges. Governments can look at ways to be more cost effective by continuing to invest collectively in a common set of solutions that meet a set of requirements and share back to those, and to make sure that we're actively avoiding vendor lock-in. NGOs can benefit from this by supporting social impact and thinking about inclusion. Again, there's advantages for private sector and for organizations like the DPGA to try and to monitor and to evaluate and to push these standards to be further as well. I think there's also a role for AI with digital public goods, both in that I think that the definition of open AI is something that is being actively evaluated and maintained right now, or is contested right now, and I think that the Digital Public Goods Alliance is at least a space to go off and say, well, how do we want to go off and to push the idea of open AI, and whether you're including the weights, whether you're including the data, how do we try and make sure that we're avoiding the pitfalls of these early AI implementations, and that we have a better, purer way to go off and to trust the technology that we're building, to see that it is meeting those standards of accountability and viability. We can do more to try and collaborate with AI so that it benefits all of humanity, and it's not something that is simply going off and benefiting the people who can afford to set up a cluster of trillion-dollar data centers. This is not something that is going to meet having all of that wealth and all that power centralized in the hands of any one country or any one company. It's not something that is beneficial for humanity. And I think that there's ways that the DPGs can go off and help differentiate what are the options and how do we move ahead collaboratively on maintaining something that can be collectively held to a much higher state of regard. And also, we need to have, with AI, have some sort of footprint or some sort of evaluation of the environmental footprint. There has been some studies around open source AIs versus proprietary AIs and the environmental footprint of those systems, but right now there isn't enough transparency from the proprietary systems to be able to have a good comparison. So, but again, if we can have an investment, if we can see governments are clearly investing and choosing open source solutions for their artificial intelligence needs, if there's a clear path forward, I think that we're going to be in a much better position going ahead. So future of DPG collaboration, we need to be looking at expanding participation in the ecosystem, finding ways to share resources so that we're reducing duplication. And it's fine to have one or two different versions of software, but there should be some. We don't want to have a splintering of different ways to accomplish the same goal. We need to make sure that there's a critical mass of developers who are able to maintain and drive a project going ahead. And so hopefully there's more efforts to work together and collaborate on some shared technology that is widely used across different sectors, especially the public sector. I think that there's having more solutions that are scalable, finding ways that I know that right now things are difficult for governments in the north, but in the global south there's a lot more challenges. There's a lot more. It's hard to keep in mind with the cuts that have come from USAID and from other governments recently as well, that there's a huge amount of need to support governments around the world, from the UN down, who have had support from some governments historically in an era when there was an effort to build and support those international institutions, or to support institutions outside of our own countries. But again, we need to be thinking about how do we provide solutions that meet for all of human needs, and not just the needs of the North. How many people here have heard about GovStack? A couple people. So this started, I believe, in Estonia, but it's an effort to try and say, how do we build those interoperable components? How do we find ways to say, well, here's this layer of the tech stack that we need to go off and find some high quality services that help support help support governments choose what technology to implement, and what kind of guidance can you provide to make sure that there is interoperability between the pieces, but also to try and help remind governments that their projects are not all special snowflakes. There are special snowflakes in technology, but not that many. Most of them are, you have a certain set of technology that is reused, and 90% of the technology is very similar to many other applications, and then you've got a light layer on top of that, which is custom. But that's not how government tends to see technology, and trying to find a way to reframe it so that governments can begin to force collaboration, or to encourage collaboration across the board more easily. I'd also like to see that we find other communities, like the civic tech communities, doing some really interesting work still. And I think there's interesting communities where citizens are engaging with an open community to try and to experiment and to push technology in different directions. And again, I think that there's the future of DPGs are going to be finding alignment with those who actually want to create a better future, who want to create a world that allows us to work more effectively together and create the world that we want to see. If you have a chance, do review the list of certified digital public goods that the Digital Public Goods Alliance is maintaining. Look at your own stack and see if there's any technology there that you might be interested in trying to or that might already be a DPG, or you think maybe should be a DPG, just to engage with it in the communities. I mean, often it's simply a matter of just adding an issue in the issue queue. That's how it started with Drupal. There was an issue that was posted in our issue queue 4 years ago, and we decided to go off and proceed to submit an application, and we got in. But look for ways to make a contribution so that the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis is able to help the good that we need to see on this planet. So find some way to think about your work in that way. Are there any questions? Yes.
I understand this is mostly about software. What is also about hardware? Because hardware is the elephant in the room. Everybody needs hardware.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that most of it is focused on software and data, but I think that there's nothing to say that open hardware isn't something that could be done. I don't think that they have a standard for how to go off and to manage the open hardware and how to include that, but I don't think there's anything that would stop that from being done. But I would definitely be good to go off and add that as something. They have an open issue queue for the Digital Public Goods Alliance, so you can engage that and suggest that within their issue queue, and I think that would be very useful to have that. Yeah. Start at the back. Sorry. What was that?
So you talked about meeting requirements to be considered a certified digital good, public digital good. But what are those requirements at the moment?
Oh, you have to fill out a long form and do some song and dance and point people to the URLs about where you're contributing to yeah, you have to document your process in a form that is it's not that onerous a process, but certainly something that does make you sort of document why your project fits with each of the sustainable development goals. What are the other elements of it? Largely, it's about just documenting your practices and trying to make sure that you're keeping up with the that there's something that they can evaluate, that they can look at your submission and see that you're following those best practices.
Which specific best practices
So in terms of what specific best practices are looking for, partly it's about like where's your documentation and how well is your documentation being maintained, product documentation, and do you have how well do you comply with it? How do you make sure you comply with the GDPR? And is there any personally identifiable information which is stored by the process? That's another one. What else? It's been over a year now since I filled in the form, so it's not all on the top of my head, but there's a simple process to go off and to submit it and to see what are the requirements. And I think it's also changing as well, because they do want to go off and have input from others to make sure they're bringing in the right people. Yeah.
How far away or at all do you think DPGs are from adopting open ethical source licensing?
I don't know that there's... I think this is one step of trying to have an ethical open source license. This is one approach to it. And I think that they would need, I think, to go off and be challenged about where else they can go off and push that. I think that they're, I have not seen in the issue queue discussions about pushing it or comparing it with other licenses that would perhaps be more ethical or would be considering other issues. Like there certainly are enough other issues around representation and how you're supporting your community. Even just getting accessibility brought into the DPGs isn't there yet, and that's a requirement of law by most governments around the world to have some commitment to accessibility. So that should be a low-hanging fruit, but it is something that just needs to be pushed for, because it wasn't something that was part of the initial discussion about what are the requirements that they wanted to push for that initial adoption. And because most open source projects, most digital products have terrible accessibility. Now that's all supposed to change with the European Accessibility Act, but I think the proof is in the pudding. So I look forward to seeing how that goes. Kat.
Thank you. I have something like 7 questions, so maybe we can see together later on. Just one question: can we submit a set of projects and not a project, but a set of projects to be DPGs compliant? And my question is deeper than that: is there a mandate possible from the DPGA to a Linux Foundation project in order for each project to be in the process, sure to be DPGs at the end? Do you see what I mean by this question?
I think so, and I think that would be having that sort of partnership between the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which I am not a member of, but I am a supporter of, and the Linux Foundation. I think would be quite useful, just given the volume of projects that the Linux Foundation is sheltering or supporting. It would make a lot of sense if even a group of those projects were able to say, we want to go off and have all of them go through the DPG process. We want to be able to, at the end of this period, have all of our license all of our products be validated. But I don't think they have any process to deal with that bulk process. But at least certainly not with the existing form. But yeah, okay, excellent, thank you. All right, unless there's any other questions, thank you all very much.